Good morning, it's April 24th, and this is To My Liberal Friends, and before I get into what I want to talk about today is the day of the NFL draft, and for all us football fans, it's a big day. Well, Bernie Sanders is out on the stump again, and I would not put it past him to make another run for the White House. His ego is as big as his hatred of capitalism. Some years ago, I represented a company from Vermont. They manufactured ballistic eyewear for the military, and they also made helmets for the military. In other words, they were a defense company. One of their champions had been former Senator Patrick Leahy from Vermont. The general counsel for the company was in Washington, and we had meetings in the Senate. For lunch, we were in the cafeteria, and a couple of tables over, there sat Senator Bernie Sanders. Greg, the general counsel, said he wanted to go over and introduce himself and say hello. After all, he lived in Vermont and worked for a Vermont company. I advised him not to do so, but he persisted. I watched as he approached Senator Sanders. There were a few words spoken between them, and suddenly Sanders stood up and walked away. I asked Greg what had happened, and as soon as he told Sanders who he worked for, the senator stopped talking and just walked away from him. Bernie Sanders has made a career out of attacking millionaires and billionaires. You might notice he only mentions billionaires these days. You see, he himself is now a multimillionaire. This is a man that had been the mayor of Burlington, Vermont, and then was in the House of Representatives from 1991 to 2007. He then moved up to the U.S. Senate. And I would remind you that the highest salary he's ever made is $174,000. He wrote a book that made him some money, but the only reason it sold was because he was a U.S. Senator. Do you think anyone would be buying a book from Sanders if he was just an average citizen, or even just the mayor of Burlington, Vermont? That's right, he made himself a multimillionaire by being a politician. But book sales alone cannot explain the 3 houses, the private jet travel that he does, and the campaign war chest that puts any politician to shame. The man who preaches frugality lives like the system's biggest beneficiary. If that feels hard to square, you're not alone. Michael Bloomberg once remarked, quote, "The best-known socialist in the country is a millionaire with 3 houses," end quote. Well, Sanders didn't deny it, and that's because he couldn't. He simply muttered something about one of the homes being a summer camp on Lake Champlain. Apparently, in Bernie's weird world, lakefront property doesn't count if you don't call it a mansion. It's a pattern that's become impossible to ignore. The senator from Vermont isn't just out of touch, he's become a parody of his own populist message. The lavish lifestyle, the ever-shifting definitions of who qualifies as a threat to democracy. In 2016, the problem was anyone who was wealthy. In 2020, it was just the ultra-wealthy. In 2025, it's anyone who can afford a lifestyle he obviously enjoys but pretends not to. Those are who he calls the oligarchs. And on stage, he speaks in absolutes about the need to dismantle this oligarchy. Off stage, he charters jets through firms like Cirrus Aviation, NJet, and Ventura Jets, spending millions in campaign funds over the years while claiming to stand in solidarity with the working class. During his current tour alone, those firms accounted for nearly 75% of his total transportation costs. You don't need to be a Wall Street analyst to see what's going on there. So here we have Bernie Sanders and his sidekick, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, on stage demanding that these oligarchs be brought down. He claims they're running the country while most of us are just scraping by, all the while he and her living in luxury. When a politician preaches about those who in his opinion indulge in excess, while he embodies it himself, it reminds me of the preachers who build megachurches and live in luxury mansions while talking about helping the poor. He raves on and on about Donald Trump each and every stop on his tour of the nation. But there's an important point that he never touches on. He's a much bigger fraud than Trump ever was or could be. For all of Trump's bombast, and there's a lot of it, he never pretended to be some poor guy from New York City. He never pretended he did not have ambition or desire to accumulate wealth. He made it clear that this is who he is and makes no apology. Sanders, on the other hand, lives like royalty while preaching about austerity. And there's one place that austerity is no place on his agenda. That's government spending. He's all for spending taxpayer dollars to fund whatever socialist program he can embrace on any given day. Finally, I would be remiss if I did not mention Ms. Cortez. She's another one that's trying to accumulate wealth, and when she was first elected to Congress, she said she could not afford an apartment. Suddenly, she lives in one down by the waterfront in D.C. and wears designer clothes. But her own district in the Bronx has become crime-ridden to a point that many of the businesses there have asked the Justice Department to come in and clean the place up. You would think she would be there every day trying to help her constituents, but she'd rather be flying on private jets and burnishing her reputation as the heir apparent to the Bernie Sanders socialism movement. We've heard a lot of talk about AOC running against current Democratic leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, and now some are even saying she could be our presidential candidate. If that's true, I think the Democrats have more problems than they're willing to admit, and that's a parody on life itself. This has been To My Liberal Friends. Thanks for listening.